All right, everybody, welcome back to the How to Hunt Deer podcast. My name is Dan Johnson, and unfortunately, our co-host or our other host, Jason, he is indisposed of, not because of what he wants, but he's undergoing a home remodeling project. And in this home remodeling project, they're currently tearing down walls. So in the background, it would be a lot of noise. And unfortunately, I know he wants to be here, but as of right now, between the remodeling project and his schedule, he's unable to make it for this week's episode. So hopefully, all of the loud, noisy stuff subsides between now and next week, where he can hop on and BS with us some more. So, there's that. That's the housekeeping, a little bit of the housekeeping. The other thing that I want to reach out and say is hopefully everybody is getting a little bit excited, especially across the Midwest. I know in the South, temperatures are going to be coming up this week and next. And what else? Around pretty much all of the United States, there's going to be a warming trend coming through. And hopefully people are able to get outside. My boy yesterday, with the neighbor boy's grandpa, they went out ice fishing and they didn't catch anything, but it was like 40 degrees outside sitting on 8 inches of ice. And it was pretty nice. Like it was fun. I went out and checked on them to see if they were catching anything. They didn't catch anything. And you know, it is what it is. That's fishing for you, but it was nice enough to go outside and do that. The other thing that's coming up, and it's happening already. My son found a shed this past week, and I'm really looking forward to getting out between now and my knee surgery to get out and do some. And I've already talked about this on the last couple episodes about me trying to get in and do some work on the properties that I have access to, move some tree stands and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to doing that, because once that knee surgery hits, I'm going to be locked down as far as being mobile and getting outside and things like that. And turkey hunting this year is even going to be a problem. So there's that. I also want to encourage everybody to go to the How to Hunt Deer YouTube channel and subscribe to that. If you could do that, I would really appreciate it. And the reason I'm asking to do that is because once you get to a certain amount of subscribers, then it unlocks other functions. So basically they reward people who have the most followers, whatever the case is. I would really appreciate it if you could go do that. If you could go to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you download the How to Hunt Deer podcast and leave a 5-star review, let them know that this podcast is not only entertaining, but educational as well. And so if you do that, I'd appreciate it. So before we get into the topic of the day, though, I do want to send a huge shout out to our partner over at Code Blue Scents. Code Blue, they've been around for a while. And when a company in the hunting industry has been around as long as they have, you know that the products are of the highest quality, right? So if you're looking for a real or synthetic deer urine, if you're looking for scent elimination products like laundry detergents or body washes, shampoos, things like that, field sprays, and then also like the Rope-A-Dope mock scrape kit, go check out codebluescents.com, discount code NFC 20. No, I'm sorry. Don't use that discount code. They have another discount code. The discount code for the How to Hunt Deer podcast is HTH20, and that's going to get you 20% off. So go do that. All right. Let's talk shed hunting. Shed hunting's fun, man. I can remember back in the day when I was shed hunting hours. I can remember there was a couple springs where I didn't have jobs, and that was by design. In my late 20s, even into my before I got married and before I met my wife, I can remember days waking up in the morning, making some toast or some eggs, maybe some bacon if I was lucky, and go shed hunting until dark. And I would scour property after property after property that back in the day, I used to have thousands and thousands and thousands of acres to hunt and shed hunt. That's not the case anymore. As most of you guys know, it's becoming harder to get access. And I can only talk about my little world here in Iowa, as far as gaining access and watching it dwindle over the years. For other people who have access to a lot of public land, this might be an opportunity for you to really get out, do some scouting, and mix scouting with shed hunting. And one thing that I've kind of noticed from shed hunting, like doing kind of a scouting shed hunting mission, is instead of just always looking down and just scouring the land, I was looking for terrain features. I was looking for heavy trails, like especially if it was a little wet, you can see the mud trails in the woods or in the fingers that would lead to the fields. You could see the old signs, the rubs, and if there was snow, it was just a road map, right, for you as far as where to go. But then, after years of shed hunting and then switching to that mentality of it's not just a shed hunting mission, it's also a scouting mission, I was able to locate some really good terrain features that would dictate deer movement. And once I started living this, I guess you would just call it a lifestyle of this whitetail 365 lifestyle, my shot opportunities went up. Lots of scouting, lots of shed hunting, lots of locating sheds, and then asking the question, why is this shed here? Right. And if it was found in a destination food source like a cornfield or a bean field, I would look at that and I go, well, they came here to eat. Now, where are they coming from? And then starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And sometimes that puzzle takes several years to put together, because if you're new to hunting, things change every year. Patterns change every year, and maybe not by a big drastic amount, but sometimes it's just one ridge or one trail, and being observant of what you're finding during scouting, what you're finding during shed hunting, it's going to put you in a position to put those pieces of the puzzle together and really find a way to hunt the deer herd in your area, right? And so if you're interested in shed hunting, I mean, that's a great way to get kids involved. That's a great way to get exercise during this time of year, especially when nothing really is happening. I mean, football's over, baseball hasn't started, nobody cares about basketball. I'm just kidding, obviously. You can't golf. Wrestling is winding down. And so here in March, it just lines up perfect. Like right now, up until March, it lines up perfect with everybody getting out and going and looking for shed antlers. Back when I started, dude, shed antlers didn't mean anything. No one went out looking for them. So I have piles of shed antlers that I'm looking at in my office right now. And it's just amazing to walk and walk and walk. And sometimes that's all you're doing. You're walking and you're walking and you're walking and you don't find anything. You come back 2 weeks later and you hit it. You find a couple. Because as you all know, or maybe you don't, shed antlers drop for several reasons during several points throughout the I mean, I found fresh sheds in December, late December, and I have found fresh sheds in late March. I have also seen a very young buck in April while turkey hunting. I'm going to say the third week of April, with one antler still on his head and the nub of another antler growing, the very first parts of antler growth in April. And so it's cool to see that range there. And so I know a lot of guys, depending on how much vegetation is up and going, they're shed hunting all year, or all this, like as soon as hunting season is over, they're going into shed hunt mode. And now with the birth of cellular trail cameras, you can get a really good idea of the deer that are on your farms right now. And you don't want to go in there and spook them, especially if your goal is to find sheds. You kind of want to stay out of the properties until you know that there is antlers that are on the ground. And one way that I've done that in the past is drop a whole bunch of corn. Now, of course, we've talked about this a little bit last year, or last week, where I dropped a whole bunch of corn and then I match it with a trail camera, a cellular trail camera, or any trail camera, really, something that's easy to get to. And then just watch the deer come to it. And some years there's a lot of big bucks that come to it. And then I just monitor those deer. Okay. Maybe one day they're coming, and the next day, especially if it's a target buck, a big antlered buck that I'm hoping to get the sheds from, they come in with no antlers. And now I got to figure out where this buck has been bedding. And I just walk back and forth until I either find him or I hit the property border and I say, well, he dropped his antlers on a different farm. And then I either can ask permission to go find him, or I just, say tough loss, and it's too bad they didn't. Now, there's been times where I have found sheds just about everywhere, but there are a handful of locations where they seem to be more predominant, where I find them the most. And it's almost the same as hunting a deer, right? I like the analogy that some of the best shed hunters, or some of the guys who do it the most, and that is the fact that you're still almost hunting deer. You're still trying to find the bed to food pattern, just in a different time of year. You're just trying to find it in this February, March timeframe. And long story short, you are just walking back and forth in this bed to food pattern, and hopefully you're trying to locate them. Now, where have I found the most sheds in the bed to food pattern? And I will go from the most likely, and it's where they spend the most amount of time, to be honest with you, the most likely to the least likely. Okay. The most likely place that I have found sheds are on destination food sources, like, for example, a picked cornfield or a standing cornfield that hadn't been, harvested yet, in the grassy areas around there, or even in the fields. Now, once you get into the fields, especially in a picked cornfield, it's going to be harder to find the sheds. However, it's not impossible if you just walk back and forth. I can remember, there's been some years where I've found a real good one in like the buffer strips in the grass or CRP. It had snowed a lot that year. All the grass was flat. I found, one of the sides of the antler on a trail leading from the timber to the picked cornfield. And then that was easy. That one was easy to find. Just kind of walk up on it. Then I said, I want the match set of this. I know from trail camera pictures that this buck has shed. And then I just started slowly walking back and forth in the cornfield until I found it. And I was keeping my paths on this cornfield very close together. We're almost, I want to say 10 feet, and just scanning where I was looking. And if you don't pay attention, you can miss those, especially if they're in the cornfield. And I was able to get lucky enough and find it and match it up. So, number one is destination food. And the reason I say destination food, or the buffer strips around destination food or a food plot, is because they are actively moving around looking for food. All right. They're getting there. And once they're there, they're on their feet, moving their heads, eating whatever's left on the ground. And then sometimes they go into these buffer strips, they bed down, they chew their cud, and then they get back up. They'll go eat some more, and they'll go back and forth and do that. And then eventually head back to bed as the sun starts to come up. So they're spending a lot of time in destination food sources. But a destination food source doesn't have to mean it's a cornfield or a bean field. It can be an oak ridge. I have found a lot of antlers in the timber from like a thick bedding area to an oak ridge that had a lot of leftover, especially in like a bumper crop type of scenario, where we had a heavy acorn fall that fall. And knowing that there's a lot of acorns, oak trees on this ridge, I just would walk it, and that's where I would find them. So destination food means wherever the food is at during the February, March timeframes. And sometimes that can be planned, like a standing cornfield, milo. It can be standing soybeans. If the people whose property you're shed hunting, that could be yourself, they are actively hoping deer drop antlers on that. There's also times where you can take advantage of that and you can walk the property boundaries. I have one in particular where the farmer or the guy who owns the property is a big time deer hunter, and he doesn't let anybody hunt it, but all of the grassy strips leading up to his field where he leaves crops and food plots for the deer are loaded with sheds every year. And I go in, I find a handful of sheds every single year in these buffer strips because I know I have the travel corridor or the buffer strips next to the standing corn. So it's just a lot of the areas. And, I made a joke about this several years ago, and it's like, what are the major keys to shed hunting? And I just jokingly said, walk and put your head down. And really, that's, as far as a technique is concerned, that's all there is. You put your head down, you move your head back and forth, and you walk in a straight line. Then you turn around, however many yards, right or left, north or south, and you do that back, and you just go back. But destination food seems to be the number one place that I have found sheds throughout the course of my uh, I guess shed hunting career, if you want to call it that. Number two, in my opinion, would be bedding areas. Now, I've found a lot of sheds in bedding areas, even to the point where I have found one of my top 10 best sheds ever was in a bed. So the deer lost part of his antler while he was bedded down, or he stood up and maybe rubbed a tree next to it, but the antler was in the bed. The only reason I found that antler, I truly believe, is that I was able to walk in there in the snow and see the bed where the deer had been sitting in. And obviously the body heat of the animal had melted the beds into the snow. And I looked at the bed, and then I saw the antler in the bed. So that's how I found that one. But even in times where there's no snow on the ground, deer spend a lot of time in bedding areas. And so the other thing is, and I think, I've heard a couple guys talk about this. When the sun hits something, it expands. When it's cold and there's no sun, it God, I can't even talk today. It shrinks. That's the dumb person word for that. But it shrinks, right? So you have this expansion and contraction all day, throughout a 24-hour period. And as it gets closer to falling off, if they're sitting it's cold and they're sitting on a south-facing slope where the sun is hitting the bedding area, and that's where they're going to be spending a lot of their time, especially in brutally cold times of year, heavy snow years. They want an area out of the wind where the sun is hitting them. And on these south-facing bedding areas, there's going to be a lot more vegetation and a lot more cover. And usually what I do in there is I slow down and I take my time really scrubbing these south-facing slopes. And sometimes you got to walk back and forth through it a couple times. And there's times where I've missed a shed going one direction, but have turned around and come back a different direction. And I've seen it because maybe a tree was blocking it, or that, a tree was blocking it, or a branch or something was a tuft of grass or something was blocking it. And then I walk back through it. Right. So everything that I'm telling you about where I've found sheds in the past doesn't mean there's going to be sheds there, right? Number one is food. Is there food? Is there cover? That's where deer are hanging out this time of year. Locate those, and in a healthy deer herd, you're probably going to find some sheds, right? Also, if you don't find deer antlers on pass number 1 in February, let's say like right now, you go out, you don't find them, come back in a week, come back in 2 weeks. If it's a destination food source that has some good, some grain spillage or some standing corn, or it's a pit cornfield that has a lot of like the combine sucked. I can remember back in the day, I can remember the property that I used to hunt. The farmer had a really shitty combine. It was old. and there was a lot of grain spillage. And then he got a new combine and there was hardly any. So I literally would stop. It was the reason that I no longer found sheds in this cornfield or this field is because the farmer got a new combine. And so I'm just like, that's crazy. That's crazy. And so I stopped finding sheds and they went somewhere else for their late season food. All right. So we've talked about the destination food sources. We've talked about the bedding areas. I've mentioned that this time of year in colder weather, these deer like to hang out on south-facing slopes, especially in colder temperatures. And then the other, like, obviously, they're not all dropping in these two locations, right? You find the bedding, you scrub those. You find the destination food, and you scrub those. And really what you do is you walk back and forth through the entire timber or the entire property that you have access to, and you scrub every foot of it. And they're either there and you find them, or they're not and you don't find them, okay? So it's pretty simple. The other places that I would look, and this is where I've found a lot of deer antlers in the past as well, is anytime there is a terrain change, meaning from flat to up, going up or down, or there's a fence crossing, or there's a creek crossing, and their body has to jar a little bit. I have found a lot of deer antlers over the course of my life on fence crossings where they have gone up and then they come down and it jars their body and they fall off. I mean, I can remember a couple times I've found deer antlers hanging on fences. I have walked by shed antlers that were hanging on trees because they were rubbing their head trying to get that antler off. I've seen it right there. I have also found a lot of shed antlers on hills leading down or up on short like creek crossings where they got to go down a little bit and then they got to jump up a little bit. I have found antlers in the water in creeks. I have found them on the hills leading down and up. So anytime a deer will need to jar its body, jumping a fence, crossing a creek, going across a ditch in a road, you'd be surprised over the course of your life. And it's not a ton. I would say it's about 20 over the course of my life, finding shed antlers in ditches or in fields where they've crossed a road or jumped to get from a food source to back to bedding or back and forth throughout the course of this time frame of year. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to see. Then when it comes to, so what I do is I go to the spots where I think are going to be the high traffic areas. If I'm not seeing any deer tracks in the actual in the trails or in maybe mud leading into the fields, that tells me there's not deer there. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time. Yes, I'm still going to go and walk some of these areas, but I'm not going through these areas with a fine-tooth comb like I would if I saw a ton of tracks leading in and out of a cornfield or something like that. That's something that I would definitely just kind of skip over. So if I'm not seeing a ton of tracks in the mud or in the snow, that tells me there's no deer there. So why am I shed hunting that area? I'll still go through it, but I'm not combing it like I would some of these other spots. The places that I will spend a lot of time are the places where I see a lot of tracks. And sometimes there's even destination food sources. And the combine example was a perfect example of that, where the deer just didn't go anymore. They weren't there. And so I decided I'm not going to spend any time in these areas if there's no deer tracks here. And maybe I was wrong. You know, there's definitely been times where a deer maybe lost his antler and I didn't see it. And then the next year I find a shed antler and hopefully they land tines down so the squirrels don't chew on the tips. But there's been a lot of times where I know I've scrubbed a property really hard. And then I come back the next year and scrub the property again. And I find antlers from the previous year. Maybe they dropped when I was not there or after I was there, or maybe I just missed them because the weather was different. Maybe there was or was not a lot of snow. So I always try to I try to imagine how deer travel throughout the landscape. I'm walking a lot of trails. There are times where I will cut ridges and I want us to envision a ridge that starts high on the south, and as it works north, it goes down to like a body of water. So what I will do is I will cut that into 4 parts. I will walk somewhere between the bottom of the drainage and up to the ridge. I'll walk down or up, turn around, down or up, turn around, down or up, turn around, down or up. And depending on how steep it is, what I'm doing is I'm walking towards the bottom, looking up and down. And then I come up a little bit, I gain elevation, I come back to a point where I can maybe see the top of the ridge or see the top of the ridge, or a position where I can see the top, but also look down to see lower ground, and that pass. Then I come up and I'll work the opposite side of the flat top of the ridge, and then look back into the top, and then down on the backside, work my way down, turn around, and come back up. And it doesn't have to be 4 passes. It's just, in that example, the ridge that I'm thinking about, it's not that thick, except at the very top of the ridge where there's a field edge where the sun gets through, more stem count, and that's just a really good travel pattern, a travel corridor for these deer. And so once I go hit my very high end spots, the bedding areas, the food sources, the creek crossings, then depending if I have enough time, or if my legs are feeling good, or my knees not killing me, that's when I'll start to scrub, and I'll just zigzag my way back and forth through the timber. And some of the biggest sheds that I've ever found have been me scrubbing timber. And you're like, Jesus, why is a deer right here? And that's just where they happen to drop. Maybe a coyote spooked them, or something happened and they stood up, and I don't know, there was a disturbance in the force, and they started working their way away from the disturbance. And that just so happens where they drop their sheds. There's no rule that says a shed has to be in between a bed to food pattern. It can be in the middle. I mean, it can be in someone's front yard. I've seen it in someone's front yard before. And I knocked on the door, and me and my son knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can we go grab that shed?" And they're like, "Yeah, go for it." And we got out of the truck, went and grabbed a shed, and that's where they drop sometimes too. And so south-facing slopes, bed to food pattern. I'm trying to think of some other tips that I could tell you guys of what to do, but just high traffic areas. Try to walk into the timber, high traffic areas, find a shed. Okay. But here's what I also want you to do. If you use Onyx, if you use Hunt Stand, drop a pin where you find that shed. Okay. Or store it in your memory bank somewhere. And I'll tell you this, that you guys have heard me talk in maybe another podcast, the Nine Finger Chronicles podcast. I know me and Jason have talked about this a little bit, where I will take a map of my farm, and then I'll take a marker or a pen or something like that. And if I'm after a particular buck, I say, okay, on this map, show me all my encounters, where I have trail camera pictures of him, where I found his sheds, where I've seen him from the truck, and I make little dots all over this map. Then I will take the marker, and or a pen, and I will connect all the dots. So every dot I draw another line to another dot. So long story short, every dot connects to another dot. And what this does is it creates a shape. And that shape then on this map within this tells me somewhere in here, this is this deer's core area, or part of his core area. It's not his entire area, because again, we're limited by the properties that we have access to. And so then what I did was, okay, I saw him from the truck here. I have his shed here. I have trail camera picture of him here. I saw him from the tree stand here, and I create a shape. And within that shape, I look for terrain features that dictate deer movement. And obviously seeing him from the tree, obviously seeing him from a road, getting a trail camera picture, but not very many people say, okay, well, just because he drops his shed here doesn't mean. No, what it means is that at some point throughout the year, that deer felt comfortable in that spot where that shed. Well, we don't know that, but that's where that deer dropped that shed. That tells me that at some point throughout the year, that deer visits at least 100 yards within the spot, and that's where he goes. And so that to me tells me, hey, that just expands this area a little bit more to look for different terrain features. Seeing a deer in velvet, seeing a deer in hardhorn, seeing him maybe even in April or May if he has a distinct feature about him that you can tell who he is without his antlers, maybe like a scar or a split ear or something like that. That tells you the entire area in which these deer live. And during February, March, that's deer live in different areas. They can go back and forth. Yes, they can travel a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles to get to a food source, especially in a state like Kansas or Nebraska or the Dakotas. If they run out of a food source, they're going to have to go somewhere else to find it, especially if they're, I'm sure there's a little crossover there for mule deer, especially if they're whitetail living in the river bottoms and a cornfield runs out or oak trees run out. They got to go somewhere to eat. And they're going to go to the easiest place to eat. So take that into consideration as well when you're looking for sheds. And then really the last thing that I've found, I think I actually did the math one time. I got rid of a whole bunch of sheds throughout the course, like a handful of years ago. I had like 3 55-gallon drums full of shed antlers over the course of the years of shed hunting. They were chewed up. They were just maybe parts of antlers that I had found, but I used to keep all of it. And I throw the good ones I have hung in my office here and downstairs, and the bad ones, or the chewed up ones, I threw in but they took up too much room, so I got rid of them. I threw them in a ditch somewhere or threw them in the trash. Actually, a couple of them I threw into a pond just to get rid of them. They're just all chewed up. And I did the math of how much time I spent. So I took my estimate of the total amount of time I've ever spent shed hunting and all of the sheds that I have found. I think it was literally somewhere between 8 to 12 hours estimated. This is an estimate. For every shed I found, it took 8 to 12 hours of walking to find one shed. Now take that into consideration. I have spent, and I know guys who that's their favorite thing to do. It's their favorite part of the whitetail 365 thing that we live. Some guys actually love to be in the tree stand. Some guys love the trail camera pictures. These guys that I know, that number's probably closer to 20 or 24. They're shed hunting like I deer hunt, if that makes sense. So just know that it takes a lot of miles to get the piles. And I had my buddies out in Wisconsin, they call it scooping. Hey, what are you doing today? We're going scooping. You want to come? I'm like, hell yeah, dude, let's go scoop. And so that's what I call shed hunting now, is scooping. And so it's a great time to be outside, especially if the weather's fine. It's one of those times where you've been cooped up in the house. It's been cold. You want to get out there, stretch the legs. There's been some times where I've been so exhausted after a day of shed hunting that I'm just like, I'm not even shed hunting anymore. I'm just trying to get back to the truck. You always sleep better. The legs get sore especially if you're taking a shed hunting trip and you're going for like 2 or 3 days in a row, day 2 and 3, the legs are pretty sore. So I always would volunteer for the easiest walks where I feel like I definitely found the least amount of sheds. Uh, there's a couple times where, man, we used to get big groups of guys together back when access was easier, and we would have a shed hunting party. Man, we would just like 12, 20 guys even. We would scrub thousands of acres on all of our properties that we had access to. And, we'd come up with some rules about, hey, if it's a specific deer, I want it, or if I kill the deer. That's a great topic. Unwritten rules of shed hunting, right? I had a buddy a couple years ago. He invited me to come to his farm and shed hunt, and I found a really good shed. But at the same time, I probably could have kept it, but I gave it back to him, and it was a good shed. It was a really good shed. It was like, it went to a 12 pointer, and I think it was the biggest typical 6. I think it was a 6, the biggest typical 6-point antler I'd ever found. But I ended up giving it to the guy, and he didn't kill it. Nobody in his family killed it. The other thing that I do is, especially if you're hunting with other people, this is a little bit of an unwritten rule. And of course, all the rules have to be talked about by whoever's property it is, or whoever has access to hunting the property, and if they invite you. But one year, so two rules that I kind of live by with shed hunting. And one is, if I find the first antler, and I'm in a group, and I find the first antler, and then the next day of shed hunting, the other guy finds the match set to that. Whoever finds the first antler gets the match set, because I've always kind of thought that the match set needs to be together, right? It just needs to be together. And the second biggest shed I have ever found, a guy was out hunting. He found a big side the day before, and I'm walking up this ridge, and I see an antler just perfectly tines up, fresh, still had the wax ring around the pedicle. I picked that son of a gun up, and I instantly knew it was this buck. And it was like a 80-inch 5-point side with a big kicker off of the G2. Just this beautiful, beautiful antler. And I knew I had to, I made a commitment, and I gave it up. And so I got my pictures taken with it and things like that. And then I ended up giving it to the guy who found it. The other one is, if someone lets you shed hunt on their property, I just think it's common courtesy. Nobody has to agree with me here. But if you find any antlers, and then the next year somebody shoots it, I always like to give those antlers to the guy who shoots the buck, whether I know him or not. Okay. I know that there was a buck, man, I want to say in 2015 or 16 or something like that. I found this match set, and it was gigantic, dude. It was like, maybe it was like maybe a 160. And to me, that's big. A 160 matching 10, typical 10. And I had it in my possession for a handful of years, or for an entire year. And then I found out the guy shot it, the neighbor on the farm. I don't have any ties to this guy. I didn't have to give him up, but I knew that he shot him. He shot this buck, and I thought it would be a good gesture to hand over the match set and be like, hey, dude, these need to stay together. Everything needs to stay with this buck. So I gave up a 160-inch typical 10 match set. It was a good. And so I would say the top 3 antlers that I've ever found, no, the top 4 antlers that I've ever found, I've kept one, because I'm the only guy who found or killed that animal. And then the next 3. So it went my biggest shed ever, my second biggest shed ever, which is 77 inches. And then the next 2, which were that match set of that 160, so out of that 4, I've given away 3 of them. And so it is what it is, man. It's just bone, but it's fun. The other crazy part that I always can remember is, I'm looking at the smallest, well, we had trail camera pictures of this buck. We got him from the guy who was hunting the farm. and he gave us permission to shed hunt it. And I'm looking at this typical 10-pointer who's about 100 inches. It's a real small basket rack, but it's 10. And this buck grew up over the next 4 years, and he became an absolute giant. Nobody killed him. No one knew about him. Rumor has it he might have gotten poached, but I have this match set right here. I can tell you exactly where I found him. Same with this match set on the wall that me and my wife found. Same with this non-typical antler hanging up on my door frame that I can tell you exactly where I found it on what fence post, along with all of these antlers that I have hanging on a piece of barbed wire here in my office and the ones downstairs. I can't tell you my wife's anniversary or her birthday party or her birthday sometimes, but I can tell you every single time, every place where I found these antlers. So it's crazy. And probably even who I was with, if I was by myself. I'm looking at one of the biggest 8-point or 4-point sides that I've ever found. Really good mass, probably went to a 4 or 5-year-old buck, just guessing, with my buddy Ryan. And I can tell you exactly where I found it, who I was with, what we were doing that day. Found a handful of really good sheds. I can tell you that there's one back here that I found with my son while on the road, while we were driving. The longest main beam antler that I ever found. That was at my buddy's dad's place. They only shotgun hunt, so he let me walk through there. Just fun. It's just another fun thing to do that keeps you active in the whitetail woods all year round. And it's something you can do with a new with wife and kids. I've been shed hunting with my wife plenty of times. And so it's something that I have liked to do, and I wish I could do more of, to be honest with you. So go shed hunt is all I'm going to say. Go shed hunt. Now, we've been talking about 40 minutes here. We're going to shut it down. Go outside, experience shed hunting, do some scouting this time of year. There's a warming trend, so why not, right? What else? I mean, you got kids, you got a wife. Yeah, take them with you. Okay. Work, call in sick, say you have diarrhea, but then go shed hunting. I don't know. Figure it out. Outside of that, huge shout out to all of you for taking time out of your day to download and listen to the How to Hunt Deer podcast. Really appreciate it. Go leave us a 5-star review somewhere. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good vibes, everybody. Be nice, be kind, and we'll talk to you next week.